Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, spent 18 months planning a single day, not because he moved slowly, but because he understood something most startup founders never learn. The moment you launch, you lose control. The 6th of June 1944 marked Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in human history. 156,000 troops crossed the Channel, supported by 5,000 ships and 11,000 aircraft, and the success rate hinged on decisions made months before a single soldier hit the beach. Modern product teams have access to real-time analytics, A/B testing, customer research, and agile methodologies that Eisenhower couldn't have imagined. Harvard Business School research consistently shows that 95% of new products fail to hit their targets. 95%, the same failure rate as storming a fortified beach, except the beach had better planning. The Allied invasion of Normandy succeeded against fortified Nazi defenses, unpredictable weather, and a timeline that couldn't slip by a single day. Your product launch has Slack, Notion, and a flexible roadmap. D-Day planning works better than your go-to-market strategy because Eisenhower and his team at SHAEF solved problems that product managers still struggle with. Clayton Christensen spent his career studying these exact problems, and they kill companies with billion-dollar war chests. Once you understand their framework, you'll see why most launches are doomed before the first customer ever sees the product. London, 1943. A British Army officer named Frederick Morgan received an impossible assignment: plan the invasion of Western Europe. No confirmed date existed. No guaranteed resources had been allocated. Just a mandate to figure out how to crack Fortress Europe after Churchill had approved the concept. Morgan's team, called Cossack, faced a problem that sounds familiar if you've ever planned a product launch. Incomplete information, competing stakeholders, limited resources, and a target that was actively trying to stop them. The German Atlantic Wall stretched from Norway to Spain, with concrete bunkers, artillery positions, beach obstacles, and mines. Behind it waited some of the most battle-hardened divisions in the Wehrmacht, and Rommel himself was reinforcing the defenses. Morgan's team didn't start by picking a beach, and that's when the real planning began. They asked a different question. What has to be true for this to work? Not, what do we hope happens? What must be true? 5 non-negotiable conditions emerged from their analysis. Air superiority over the landing zone. Naval dominance in the Channel. Enough landing craft to move men and equipment. Surprise about the exact location. And here's the one everyone forgets: the ability to reinforce faster than the Germans could counterattack. That last condition shaped everything because it meant the plan wasn't really about day one. The invasion would succeed or fail based on what happened after the initial assault, on day 2, day 3, day 30. Jeff Bezos would later call this day one thinking, the obsession with what comes after launch rather than the launch itself. SHAEF figured it out 40 years before Amazon existed. Morgan's team made another decision that changed everything. They chose Normandy over Pas de Calais. Calais sat closer with a shorter crossing and seemed more obvious, which is exactly why the Germans expected it. Normandy stretched farther from England, but it had something Calais didn't: beaches that could handle the volume of reinforcements they'd need in the weeks after landing. They weren't optimizing for the launch, they were optimizing for the scale-up. Startup terminology would call this choosing the beachhead with better product-market fit for their actual operation, not the one that looked easiest on paper. When Eisenhower took over planning in early 1944, he immediately expanded the invasion from 3 beaches to 5: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. He demanded more landing craft, more paratroop divisions, more naval support. Everyone told him resources were constrained, and he pushed back hard. If we can't do this at the necessary scale, we shouldn't do it at all. Eisenhower grasped a principle that systems theorists would formalize decades later. Complex operations fail at the weakest constraint, not the average capability. Enough troops but insufficient landing craft means failure. Enough landing craft but inadequate air cover means failure. Everything in place but bad weather means failure. The system is only as strong as its most vulnerable point. The Allies developed something called mulberry harbors, artificial ports made of massive concrete caissons towed across the channel and sunk to create breakwaters. The planners realized early that you can't capture a port on day one because the Germans will destroy it before surrendering. The solution was to bring your own infrastructure. The logistics obsession went deeper than artificial harbors. Operation Pluto, which stood for pipeline under the ocean, laid fuel lines across the English Channel floor, and by war's end, they'd pumped 1 million gallons of fuel per day to the advancing armies. The planners didn't assume supply would work itself out. They engineered supply before they needed it. Hobart's funnies added another layer of specialized problem solving. These were tanks designed for specific beach obstacles, flail tanks to clear mines, flame-throwing tanks for bunkers, tanks that could lay their own roads across soft sand. Each one solved a specific problem that would otherwise halt the entire operation. Not workarounds. Purpose-built constraint removal. Weather became the ultimate variable that nobody could control. James Stagg, the chief meteorologist, tracked Atlantic weather patterns with technology we'd consider primitive today. No satellites existed. No computer models ran calculations. Just observations, barometric pressure readings, and educated guesses. Eisenhower had a window from June 5th through the 7th of 1944. After that, tidal conditions wouldn't work again for 2 weeks. June 5th looked terrible with storms in the channel, high winds, and poor visibility. The decision to delay 24 hours and launch on June 6 became famous, but what's less discussed is the framework Eisenhower used. He didn't ask whether the weather would be good. He asked whether the weather would be good enough. Poker players call this pot odds. Not whether you'll win, but whether the expected value justifies the bet. Eisenhower was calculating expected value, with 156,000 lives as the stake. Good enough to launch, not perfect, acceptable. And he knew exactly what acceptable meant, because his team had defined minimum conditions months in advance. Wind speed below a specific threshold, wave height below a certain level, cloud ceiling above a minimum altitude. When Stagg reported a brief break in the weather on June 6, Eisenhower could make an instant decision because the criteria were already established. Operation Overlord isn't just military history, it's a masterclass in launch planning, and the parallels to product strategy are almost eerie. D-Day planning required minimum viable conditions. Product launches call this minimum viable product, except most teams get it backwards. They define MVP as the least we can build. The Allies defined it as the least that can succeed. Completely different framing. Imagine if SHAEF had used modern agile methodology and shipped the invasion to iterate based on user feedback. The Wehrmacht was not interested in providing a sprint retrospective. D-Day required constraint identification. Product launches call this competitive analysis and market research, but most teams analyze competitors without identifying which constraints actually matter. The Germans had more troops in France. The Allies won anyway. Troop count wasn't the binding constraint. D-Day required reinforcement planning. Product launches call this post-launch roadmap and customer success infrastructure, but most teams treat launch as the finish line. The Allies treated it as the starting gun. Product launches fail for the same reason military operations fail. The team optimizes for the moment of contact, not the aftermath. It's the business equivalent of winning the beach and losing the war. 3 principles from SHAEF would save most product launches. First principle: define your non-negotiables before you start. Morgan's team listed 5 conditions that had to be true, not nice to have, but non-negotiable. If anyone failed, the invasion would be cancelled or redesigned. How many product launches have you seen with clearly defined kill criteria, conditions that would cause the team to delay or cancel rather than proceed and fail? Most launches operate on hope. We think customers will respond. We believe the market is ready. We feel good about the positioning. The Cossack planners didn't feel anything. They calculated 18 marks. Decision theorists call this pre-commitment, criteria established before emotion and sunk costs could cloud judgment. Before your next launch, write down 5 conditions that must be true. What minimum customer activation rate makes this viable? What distribution channel must be working? What operational capacity must exist? What competitive response would change everything? What timeline assumption are you making that could break? If you can't define these precisely with actual numbers, you're not ready to launch, you're ready to hope. Quibi raised $1.75 billion in venture capital and launched in April 2020. 90 days later, the product was clearly failing. 6 months later, it shut down entirely. The post-mortems cited the pandemic, competition from TikTok, and content strategy problems. Quibi's real failure wasn't timing or competition. It was category error. They planned a D-Day when they needed a guerrilla campaign. They assumed mobile-first short-form premium content had a market. They assumed commute times created viewing windows. They assumed Hollywood talent would differentiate them. All assumptions, no conditions, no kill criteria. Schaef's framework would have forced different questions. What if commute times disappear? What if short-form competition intensifies? What's our minimum subscriber threshold at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? And here's the critical question. At what point do we abort? Quibi had no pre-commitment, which meant they couldn't kill it until they'd burned through over $1 billion. Second principle, solve constraints with dedicated solutions, not workarounds. The Mulberry Harbors cost enormous resources to design and build. Hobart's Funnies required specialized manufacturing. Operation Pluto demanded engineering that had never been attempted. Operation Fortitude, the deception campaign that convinced Hitler the real invasion was coming at Calais, consumed intelligence assets for months. None of these were nice-to-haves. Each one addressed a specific constraint that would otherwise cause failure. No port available? Build one. Beach obstacles blocking tanks? Build tanks specifically for them. Fuel supply across the channel? Pipe it under the ocean. Germans expecting you? Make them expect you somewhere else. Product teams do the opposite. They identify constraints and then decide to work around them. Can't integrate with the customer's existing system? We'll provide manual data. Export. Don't have enough support staff for launch volume? We'll create FAQ documentation. Marketing budget got cut? We'll rely on organic growth and word of mouth. Every workaround introduces failure, probability, and stacking enough of them makes failure certain. It's compound interest working against you, where each 80% solution multiplies together until you're left with a 30% chance of anything working at all. Apple's AirPods launch in 2016 provides a good counterexample. They identified a key constraint. Bluetooth audio switching between devices was terrible. Users hated repairing headphones. It was a known pain point that other companies worked around with instruction manuals and support articles. Apple built the W1 chip, dedicated silicon solving one specific problem: seamless device switching. The chip cost years of development and required new manufacturing, but it removed the constraint entirely instead of working around it. The AirPods became the most successful headphone product in history, not because of sound quality or brand recognition, but because they solved the actual constraint, preventing wireless earbuds from going mainstream. What constraint is your next launch working around instead of solving? Third principle, plan for reinforcement, not just assault. Eisenhower expanded the invasion specifically to increase post-landing capacity. More beaches meant more unloading points. More unloading points meant faster reinforcement. Faster reinforcement meant winning the build-up race against German counterattacks. The first wave at Normandy was essentially sacrificial, especially at Omaha Beach, where casualties exceeded 2,000 on D-Day alone. The plan assumed heavy first-wave losses and was designed to survive them. This sounds brutal because it was brutal. It was also realistic in a way that most launch plans refuse to be. The plan worked because enough follow-on forces could reach the beach to exploit whatever foothold the first wave established. The success metric wasn't did the first wave succeed. The metric was, can we reinforce faster than the enemy can respond? Product launches obsess over first contact. Launch day downloads, first week revenue, initial press coverage, media mentions. These are first wave metrics. And like the first wave at Omaha, they don't determine success. What determines success is whether you can build on whatever foothold you establish. Customer acquisition cost means nothing if customer lifetime value can't support the reinforcement. Tesla's Model 3 launch in 2017 shows how this works in practice. The first wave was rough with production hell, quality issues, delayed deliveries, and missed targets. Measured by launch day metrics, it looked like a disaster. Tesla had planned for reinforcement. They'd built gigafactory capacity before they needed it. They'd designed the manufacturing line for iteration. They had capital reserves to survive a slow ramp. Elon Musk had learned from SpaceX, where the first 3 Falcon 1 rockets exploded before the 4th succeeded. First wave losses were expected. Reinforcement capability was the actual bet. By 2023, the Model 3 had become the best-selling electric vehicle in history, not because of the launch, but because of what came after. Google Glass, launched in 2013 with tremendous buzz. First wave metrics looked promising. Tech press loved it. Early adopters lined up. Glass explorers became a cultural phenomenon. Google won the beach. No reinforcement plan existed. No path from early adopter to mainstream. No manufacturing scale-up. No ecosystem development. No answer to the privacy concerns that emerged immediately. Google Glass won the beach and lost the war because there was no plan for day 2. What Eisenhower and Morgan and Schaaf understood 80 years ago, and what product teams keep relearning the hard way, is that launch success is a systems problem, not a moment problem. Non-negotiable conditions, dedicated constraint solutions, reinforcement planning, these aren't separate ideas. They're all expressions of the same truth. You don't win operations at the point of contact. You win them in the preparation and the follow-through. Most product launches fail because teams plan for a moment. They imagine the launch as an event, a date on a calendar, a press release, a big push. The moment arrives, the moment passes, and then reality sets in. The constraints they worked around start causing problems. The non-negotiables they never defined turn out to be unmet. The reinforcement they didn't plan for never materializes. Next time you're planning a launch, run the Schaaf framework. What 5 conditions must be true before you proceed? And what happens if any of them fail? What constraints are you working around that you should be solving? What's your day 2 plan? Day 30. How do you reinforce faster than the market can respond? The best product launches aren't built with startup hustle and aggressive timelines. They're built with operational planning rigor that a supreme allied commander would recognize. The frameworks exist. The vocabulary exists now too. D-Day and product launches. Military history and go-to-market strategy. 2 fields that seem completely unrelated, but the underlying principles connect everywhere. We find hidden structures connecting fields that seem to have nothing in common. Military logistics and startup operations. Weather forecasting and decision theory. Amphibious assault and customer acquisition. If you want to see how other unexpected domains explain business problems, subscribe. Next week, what hostage negotiators understand about sales calls that sales trainers don't. Comment below. What's the biggest constraint you're working around instead of solving? The workaround that's quietly multiplying your failure probability. I read them all.